Over in the pages of Marvel Comics' current Amazing Spider-Man run, the publisher is gearing up for a massive wedding. But this time the wedding isn't focused on Peter Parker and his supporting cast, but instead focuses on one of Peter's former roommates, Randy Robertson. Randy is all set to take Janice Lincoln, the daughter of Tombstone, as his bride, seemingly causing a shockwave throughout New York City and in Spider-Man's supporting cast. My name is Ariko Braddock, and today, let's go ahead and take a look over at the Amazing Spider-Man issue 31. Before we dive deeper into the video, want to encourage you to consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button over on our video. Special oversized issue. It's the wedding of the year. Peter Parker is the best man, and Tombstone is walking the bride down the aisle. That's right. Janice Lincoln and Randy Robertson are tying the knot, and there's no way all the crime bosses in New York City aren't seeing this as an opportunity to off Tombstone. This story sets up our big spider event of Zeb Wells and John Romita Jr.'s second year on Amazing Spider-Man, and that's just the half of it. Also in this issue, Bachelorette parties, other Amazing Spider-Man story preludes, glimpses of some of the biggest unannounced Spider projects, and extra bonus awesomeness. Amazing Spider-Man 31 is written by Zeb Wells, featuring pencils from John Romita Jr., Emilio Laiso, and Zé Carlos. We also have inks from Scott Hanna, Emilio Laiso, and Zé Carlos. We have colors from Marcio Menyz and Bryan Valenza, letters from VC's Joe Caramagna, and we have a cover coming in directly over from John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz. Very early on over in The Amazing Spider-Man, there was a storyline centered around Peter Parker and his relationship over with Tombstone. So really fascinated to see some of these story threads pick up over in Amazing Spider-Man 31. This is an absolutely massive issue coming in at over 80 pages. The opening sequence showcasing some of the mob bosses over in New York City conspiring about the upcoming wedding and essentially how to keep it safe was a great way to kind of lead up over to the big ceremony. Getting commentary from characters like the Owl and Madame Mask, they're just headed over into this wedding, was really endearing over for the series. I thought these elements really brought out a special part of artist John Romita Jr.'s work over on the title. I think Romita Jr. really needs to be utilized in special key moments throughout these storylines, as he draws really imposing characters that have huge expressions, making older characters like Tombstone a great way to employ some of his strengths over in the title. Also, I have to commend Zeb Wells and Marvel's editorial for switching creative teams and artists depending on the scenes throughout the issue as well. Very excited to see future illustrations from John Romita Jr. on people like Tombstone. I think this last panel on a page filled with so many panels gives a great key to some of his expressions over in the comic book as well. I want to talk a little bit about what Emilio Laiso and Zé Carlos contributed on Amazing Spider-Man 31. So they really illustrated this next sequence featuring the Bachelorette and Bachelor party for both Randy and Janice. I seriously enjoyed watching some of the implications of Felicia Hardy spend some time over with some of the more minor supervillains in the Marvel Universe adjacent over to Janice's wedding. Watching Felicia start to become close to them, even though she sort of has this tie to the underworld and Spider-Man, was just a great way to watch Zeb Wells unleash his more humor-oriented writing. Also, Emilio Laiso and Zé Carlos' really expressionistic and kind of curvy, rounded line, I think really help get some of the animations and details that I don't think John Romita Jr. would have been able to render over in this series. There's some really great and joyous expressions over from the White Rabbit across some of these scenes too that just make the issue so endearing to experience. I really thought that Zeb Wells had some fantastic characterization over from Randy Robertson in particular in the story. Watching so few people turn out over to his bachelor party, decidedly gets him a little bit down in the dumps here. And watching Peter try and spin his mood in a bit of a different direction here really inspires some of the great foundations of Amazing Spider-Man stories. I also love the political implications of Randy taking sort of Janice, as his partner, and about how that affects some of his own interpersonal relationships. Really have to hand it to Zeb Wells for evoking that level of detail. Also, Emilio Laiso and Zay Carlos just capture the expressions with people like Randy Robertson and Felicia Hardy so well across their individual stories over in the comic book series. One aspect of this issue that, didn't inspire as much confidence with me is some of the end results of where Zeb Wells leaves off with the relationship over with Felicia Hardy and Peter Parker in this issue. I felt like this storyline has so much potential to bring the Amazing Spider-Man into really fascinating directions, and I'm hoping that the developments in this issue serve as a minor roadblock in their relationship as opposed to something that's going to derail a plot thread that Zeb Wells has spent so much time building up across the Amazing Spider-Man. This issue actually features two separate parts. Towards the beginning of the second chapter, we get John Romita Jr. contributing some art back over on the series. Watching some of Romita Jr.'s interactions with characters like Peter and Aunt May during this really wacky and hectic marriage was just a great way to appreciate some of the dialogue and relationships over in this Amazing Spider-Man run. I also had a blast watching some of the interpersonal just reactions over between Hammerhead and Peter Parker. I thought there were so many just fantastic moments captured. And also, artist John Romita Jr. was just able to get such a great expression from Hammerhead really late into the series. There is such a wonderful moment between Randy and his father Robbie over in the comic book. This was yet another really fantastic use of John Romita Jr.'s art that just inspired so much emotion for me over on the comic book page. And we just got several sappy moments collected with each other. So watching the next sort of outburst of violence that kind of leaves off the main portion of this issue is also quite thrilling here. I think The Amazing Spider-Man 31 does a great job juggling so many plot threads and individual character moments. And I want to spend just a few moments here talking about some of the additional stories in the issue. As we said previously, this issue is clocking in at over 80 pages, so we have quite a lot to cover here. Let's go ahead and talk about this Miss Marvel story written over by Zeb Wells, featuring art from David Lopez, colors from KJ Diaz, and letters from VC's Joe Caramagna. So The Amazing Spider-Man really kind of kicked off the arc that saw Kamala Khan move over to the X-Men. Getting a chance to watch both of these characters acknowledge the changing relationships and some of the fallout from previous issues of Amazing Spider-Man was absolutely thrilling to me. And I also really like how Zeb Wells was able to interject some of his own personality in the issue. Take a look at the page that we have up on the screen, rendered just so beautifully from David Lopez. But just watching the amount of text that Wells crafts between Kamala and Peter just inspires so much intrigue and really shows that this run of Amazing Spider-Man has like a decided personality when you contrast it with some of the other issues in the series. I love the fact that Kamala Khan has some dialogue that matches some of Peter's kind of crazier emotions over in the series. Watching both of these characters use the word hot dog in the series shouldn't get that kind of emotion from me, but actually manages to inspire quite a great sense of humor across the comic book. Also, getting to see Kamala acknowledge that she is now a member of the X-Men in the core Spider-Man book feels like a great place to tell readers who are maybe just checking out Spider-Man as opposed to some of the X-Men comics about that upcoming status quo. And I think it was done in a way that celebrated the personality of both characters and called upon some of the amazing facial expressions and page layouts over from artist David Lopez. Really happy with this Kamala story with Peter and really encourage you to go ahead and check this one out. As far as this next story over in the collection, it was really intriguing to watch Dr. Octopus gather some of the plot threads over with the Superior Spider-Man. This next story is called The Man with All the Answers, written by Dan Slott, penciled by Mark Bagley, inked by John Dell, featuring colors by Edgar Delgado and letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. So in terms of some of Dan Slott's writing over on The Amazing Spider-Man, I think it's a bit of a hit or miss. I've definitely read some wonderful issues from Dan Slott, but oftentimes I need some sort of fascinating hook or entry point into the story. I actually fairly liked how Zeb Wells wrote Dr. Octopus in the past couple issues of Amazing Spider-Man. He's definitely annoying, but just had this great kind of master plan that inspired a lot of confidence in some of the other characters. Watching this kind of abrupt set of plot points play out between the issue and not come to any decided conclusion was a little bit disappointing to me. I know that there is a Superior Spider-Man comic book upcoming from Marvel Comics, but I wish there was maybe like one or two more plot threads implemented here throughout the story so it could make the debut for that upcoming Superior Spider-Man seem really, really interesting. To be fair, there's at least one or two plot threads from this storyline that I think will be picked up in that series, but I definitely do see this as a critique of this particular story within the issue. We have another Dan Slott story that I actually have some interesting things to say about that we'll cover in just a few moments here. All right, let's go ahead and head into our next story in this massive Spider-Man issue. This upcoming Spider-Man story is going to be a lot of fun because it's really looking to introduce Mary Jane as the Jackpot identity and reference some of the previous work in the Mary Jane and Blackcat miniseries that I also really appreciated coming in from Marvel as well. So this issue is written over from Celeste Bronfman, featuring pencils from Alba Glez, and we have inks from Elisabetta, D'Amico, and Craig Yeung. The colors are illustrated over from Jim Campbell, with letters from VC's Joe Caramagna. So in terms of this chapter, introducing the Jackpot identity for Mary Jane, I did find that some of the pencils towards the beginning of the issue over from Alba Glez didn't pull on some of the strengths that I see this artist employ a little bit later on in the issue. It's a shame that we don't have more preview pages because I really think that when Felicia Hardy is introduced over in the issue, the book takes on such a fantastic and joyous tone here. I love where Celeste Bronfman kind of heads into the characterization of Mary Jane as this issue opens. Mary Jane is seemingly just distraught by the loss of her kids that happened in the previous issues over in Amazing Spider-Man. I think that's just such a great and compelling plot hook for a character. And with the absence of Peter Parker, does it mean that Mary Jane is essentially looking to stray away from Paul or continue his relationship with him now that her kids have been lost? I think there's so many interesting questions for Mary Jane just moving forward in terms of her life. Watching her sort of get caught up over with Felicia Hardy in this chapter was absolutely thrilling, and getting to see her take on the identity of Jackpot in the context of this story was just so, so wonderful. I love how dark this issue gets in terms of the psychology over for Mary Jane, and I'm really hoping that when this upcoming Mary Jane comic book comes out over from Marvel, that some of these plot threads are also going to be utilized and implemented. Let's go ahead and talk about this next story over in the collection. So with this story, it's actually centered around the character of Spider-Woman. I was unable to locate the exact creative team behind this tale, but I did see that in the upcoming Spider-Woman miniseries tying into Gang War, the creative team on that was Steve Folks as well as Carola Borelli. So curious to see if I am indeed correct and if Folks and Borelli contributed to this portion of the issue featuring Spider-Woman, or if it was another creator over at Marvel Comics. In terms of the storyline over with Spider-Woman, watching some of Jessica Drew's interactions with Taskmaster really inspired some intriguing developments for these two. I love the fact that this Spider-Woman story is also referencing some series from Spider-Woman's past, specifically the one over from Dennis Hopeless and Javier Rodriguez. So really hope that that sort of continues to develop and more fascinating plot threads are implemented there. I really appreciate the camaraderie between Jessica and Taskmaster because the recent Marvel film over with Black Widow doesn't feature that same sort of character interaction. So really happy that I still have an outlet over for the Taskmaster character in the space of Marvel Comics. There was also some interesting implications set up with Carol Danvers that I'm hoping are going to be resolved in some future issues of Amazing Spider-Man. This annual is still not over yet. We have another story called The Mother of Invention, written by Dan Slott, featuring art from Paco Medina, colors from Eric Arcienega, and letters from VC's Joe Caramagna. The Mother of Invention story was a great place for me to re-experience some of Dan Slott's writing over in the context of Amazing Spider-Man, as we alluded to earlier. While I wasn't a big fan on that Doc Ock story setting up Superior Spider-Man, watching some of the plot threads setting up this upcoming Spider-Boy storyline and really focusing in on the villains, I think fleshed out the really quirky side of Dan Slott's writing in an endearing way. I love taking a look at some of the artwork as well from Paco Medina. Paco Medina delivers just great page compositions, and all of these sort of talking animals in this issue are a great use of some of his skill set. I think Medina drew a lot of really crazy things during Sins of Sinister, but still love the fact that Marvel is throwing yet more craziness at him with Spider-Boy and some of these plot threads over in The Amazing Spider-Man. This next tale, called The Case of Perry Thomas, A Spider Situation, is both written and drawn from Albert Montes. Albert Montes delivers such amazing and inspiring art in this issue. Learning about Perry Thomas and what his deal is, as well as the context behind the storyline, is so much fun. Just can't believe how expressive some of the artwork over from Montes is in these pages. And I think there's also just a great way to expand on the relationship between Peter Parker and Johnny Storm. If I could complain about one thing, it's that I would definitely have more to say about this story, and I wish it could have gone in maybe an issue of Spider-Man that wasn't 80 pages. The next tale, called Spider-Man Loosey Goosey from Cole Atkinson, was yet another crazy 2 pages filled with tons of humor centered around Spider-Man and a goose. So really can't say enough fantastic things about this story. Just like that previous one over with Perry, it feels like overkill considering the amount of content that's in this issue and just the kind of low impact and stakes that this tale has. Next up, I want to talk about this storyline called Huntress, written by Zeb Wells, featuring art from Patrick Gleason. We have colors from Edgar Delgado and letters from VC's Joe Caramagna. Over in this Huntress story, it looks like we get a preview at the upcoming issues of Amazing Spider-Man, as we're reintroduced to the Goblin Queen and Kraven the Hunter here, who are also both decidedly on the cover for Amazing Spider-Man 32. Watching some of the interactions between Kraven and the Goblin is just fascinating across this issue, and definitely sets up a dynamic and plot thread for the Amazing Spider-Man 32 that I definitely didn't expect. So even though this is a story that doesn't have a ton of plot, I think it does set up some intriguing ideas for the next Spider-Man chapter. I want to talk a little bit about the very, very final story over in Amazing Spider-Man 31. It actually picks up after a credit sequence. I feel like if I happen to tell you who the creative team is, there's a good chance that you're going to figure out which Spider-Man story this is. And plus, this is more of a kind of teaser over to an upcoming Spider-Man story that's set to be published over from Marvel Comics. So very excited about some of the implications of this tale and about the fact that Marvel is returning to one of their most infamous Spider-Man stories to kind of close out this chapter of Amazing Spider-Man issue 31. So at the end of the day here, we had a just massive, colossal comic book over in Amazing Spider-Man 31. I think the main story between Randy Robertson and Janice Lincoln managed to pull out so many endearing moments with these characters. And now that we have the final elements of the issue, I think some of the backdrop over for the gang war is a lot more kind of laid out and specific. I'm very excited to see where that goes in some future issues of The Amazing Spider-Man, as well as to see where some of these supporting cast stories develop with tales like Mary Jane as well as Kamala Khan. One final thing I'll say here is I feel like a lot of what Dan Slott has been doing with the Spider-Man property has been a little bit disconnected from what Zeb Wells has been doing. Would love to see maybe both creators collaborate just a little bit more, and I'm happy to see that some of these Dan Slott concepts like Spider-Boy are in this really massive issue for Amazing Spider-Man. I want to know from you, what were some of your thoughts over on this issue? Did you like The Amazing Spider-Man 31 as much as I did? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks so much for coming to check out our review over for this issue, and we'll be back to talk Spider-Man and Marvel Comics in the near future. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye.